There is a moment, and if you've ever been in love with someone you cannot have, you know exactly the moment I mean, when the body betrays the soul. Mine happened on a Tuesday, November the 14th, to be precise. 7:43 in the evening. I remember because the church clock had just struck the quarter hour, and the sound moved through the empty nave, like something alive, like a pulse that wasn't mine. She was standing at the altar rail, not praying, just standing there, her fingers resting on the wood as if it were the edge of a boat and she were deciding whether to step aboard or let the tide carry it away without her. Elena. Even her name felt like a prayer I wasn't allowed to say. I was 47 years old. I had worn the collar for 22 years. I had baptized 131 children, heard 9,000 confessions, buried 63 parishioners whose faces I still saw when I closed my eyes at night. I had given my life to God, freely, willingly, with a joy that once felt as natural as breathing. And in that moment, standing 12 feet from a woman in a wet raincoat, I understood for the first time that a man can drown on dry land. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you about the choice that broke everything open, I need you to understand how I got there. Because no one falls from grace in a single step. It's a long walk, and the road is paved with small, beautiful, devastating kindnesses. So if you're listening from wherever you are tonight, from your car, from your bed, from a kitchen where the dishes are waiting, drop a comment and tell me where you're hearing this. Because this story is about the gap between who we promise to be and who we actually are. And I think if you're honest, you'll recognize yourself somewhere in it. Let me take you back 22 years to the day I first arrived in Dunmore. I came to Dunmore in the rain. That should have been the first sign. Dunmore is a town that wears its weather like a second skin. It sits on the Atlantic coast, clinging to the cliffs the way a barnacle clings to rock. Stubbornly, without apology. The houses are painted in colors that the sea has long since faded. Blues that became gray, yellows that became cream, reds that became the color of dried blood. In summer, there are perhaps 3,000 souls. In winter, half that. The rest are ghosts or tourists or memories. I was 25 when Bishop Moran assigned me to St. Brendan's. Fresh out of seminary, thin as a communion wafer, someone joked. I had imagined myself in a city parish, Dublin, perhaps, or Cork, where the work would be urgent and visible. Instead, I was sent to the edge of the world, to a church that smelled of damp stone and candle wax and centuries of whispered sins. The rectory was a 3-room cottage beside the church, with walls so thick the wind couldn't penetrate, and so old the damp had. My predecessor, Father Brennan, had died at 86 in the armchair by the fire, and when I arrived, his impression was still in the cushion. No one had thought to replace it. But I was happy. I want you to understand that. I was deeply happy. There is a particular peace that comes from knowing your purpose. I woke each morning at 5:30, prayed until 6, prepared the altar for 7 o'clock Massachusetts, The routine was a kind of music, repetitive, yes, but in the way that waves are repetitive, each one the same and each one different, each one arriving and departing with its own character. My parishioners were fishermen and shopkeepers, teachers and nurses, widows who had outlived 3 decades of husbands and still came to Mass. In their good coats, their rosaries clicking like tiny bones. I loved them, not in the abstract, theological way you might imagine, but in the specific, exhausting, human way that love actually works, carrying Mrs. Gallagher's groceries when her hip was bad, sitting with Declan Murphy, through the long nights after his son's accident, explaining to teenage boys that God was not a policeman and that doubt was not a sin. I wore my cassock the way a soldier wears his uniform, with pride, with identity, with the quiet knowledge that it separated me from the world in ways that were both protective and isolating. For 15 years, the weight of it felt like wings. Elena Carvalho arrived in Dunmore in September, the year I turned 40. She moved into the white cottage on Harbor Street, the one that had been empty since old Mrs. Flynn went to the nursing home in Waterford. I noticed her the way a priest notices any new face in a small parish, with mild curiosity and pastoral duty. She was perhaps 35, dark-haired, with the kind of face that was more interesting than beautiful, strong. Cheekbones, a wide mouth, eyes that seemed to be looking at something just beyond whatever was in front of her. She came to the 7 o'clock Mass on her first Sunday, sat in the fourth pew left side. She didn't sing the hymns, but she followed the liturgy with the ease of someone who had grown up with it, kneeling and standing at the right moments. Her responses murmured rather than spoken. After Mass, she introduced herself at the door. "I'm Elena. I've just moved here from Lisbon." Well, from Lisbon via London, via a few wrong turns. She smiled when she said it, but the smile didn't quite reach the rest of her face. "Welcome to Dunmore," I said. "If there's anything you need, the rectory door is always open." A priest's standard greeting. I had said it 100 times. But she looked at me then, really looked, the way people rarely look at priests, as though she were seeing the man beneath the collar, and said, "Is that true? Is it always open?" "Always," I said. I learned her story in pieces, the way you learn any story worth knowing. Not all at once, but in fragments that slowly assemble into something whole. She had been married, briefly, unhappily. Her husband, Miguel, had been a good man who drank and a bad drunk who couldn't stop. She had lost a child, a daughter, stillborn at 7 months. She didn't tell me this directly. I heard it from Maeve O'Brien, the postmistress, who heard it from the letting agent, who heard it from someone in London. Small towns are like that. Information moves like water through limestone, slowly, silently, leaving traces you can't quite wash away. Elena came to Daly, Massachusetts. Not just Sundays, daily. 7 o'clock every morning, rain or shine, though in Dunmore it was almost always rain. She sat in the fourth pew. She closed her eyes during the Eucharistic prayer, and she stayed afterward, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour, sitting in the silence the way some people sit by the sea. I told myself it was devotion. I told myself it was grief finding its proper vessel. I told myself many things. The first time Elena came to confession was a Thursday in October. The wind was hammering the stained glass so hard I thought the saints might shatter. I sat in the confessional, that strange, coffin-sized room that smells of old wood and older secrets, and heard the screen slide open. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been a long time since my last confession. I recognized her voice immediately. There is a quality to some voices, a particular timbre, that registers not in the ear but somewhere lower, somewhere closer to the chest. How long? I asked. 7 years. Since my daughter. What followed was not, strictly speaking, a confession. She didn't enumerate sins. She didn't recite the formula. Instead, she talked about the silence of her cottage at night, about the sound the sea made when the tide was out, not a roar but a withdrawal, a pulling back that sounded like the world inhaling, about how she had moved to Dunmore because she wanted to live somewhere that matched what she felt inside. Gray, windswept, beautiful in a way that required effort to see. I don't know if I'm confessing sins or just confessing loneliness, she said. Is there a difference? There was a pause then, the kind of pause that has weight and texture, the kind you could hold in your hands if hands were made for holding silence. Sometimes, I said, loneliness is the most honest prayer there is. I heard her exhale, a small sound, the sound of someone setting down, something heavy. She came back the next Thursday, and the next. The confessional became something other than what it was designed for, not a place of penance, but a place of presence. She would talk, and I would listen, and in the listening, something happened that I had no name for and no defense against. She told me about Lisbon, about the light there, the way it falls on the azulejo tiles in the afternoon, turning the whole city into something painted. She told me about her mother, who sang fado while cooking and cried at the beauty of sardines grilling on a summer evening. She told me about her daughter, Maria, she had named her, and how she sometimes still felt a kick inside her, a phantom movement, the body remembering what the mind was trying to forget. And I, God forgive me, I told her things too. Not sins, not confessions, but truths that I had never spoken aloud. About the silence of the rectory at night. About how I sometimes stood at the window and watched the lights in the houses along the harbor and wondered what it felt like to close a door and have someone on the other side of it who was waiting for you. About the weight of the cassock, how some mornings it felt not like cloth, but like stone, like I was putting on a wall between myself and everything that was soft and warm and human. The confessional screen is made of dark wood with a lattice pattern. You can see shapes through it, shadows, the suggestion of a face, but you cannot see clearly. That is the point. The architecture of confession is designed to allow truth without consequence, honesty without exposure. But I knew exactly what she looked like on the other side of that screen. I knew the way her hair fell across her forehead. I knew the small scar on her left hand where she'd burned herself as a child. I knew the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, as if the weight of her thoughts shifted to one side. And that was the first sin. Not touching, not desiring, but knowing. The cassock weighs approximately 3 pounds. I know because I once, in a moment of strange compulsion, placed it on the kitchen scale. 3 pounds. The weight of a small Bible. The weight of a human heart. For 2 decades, I had put it on each morning the way a diver puts on a suit before descending into dark water. It was protection, identity, a second skin that told the world who I was before I opened my mouth. The cassock weighs approximately 3 pounds. I know because I once, in a moment of strange compulsion, placed it on the kitchen scale. But that winter, the winter Elena came, the cassock began to feel different. Each morning, as I fastened the 33 buttons, one for each year of Christ's life, the seminary taught us, I felt the fabric press against me like a question I couldn't answer. I began to notice things I had never noticed. The way the collar left a mark on my neck after a long day. The way the black cloth absorbed the heat of the sun but never seemed to release it. So I carried the warmth of the afternoon long into the evening. The way it rustled when I walked, a constant whisper that sounded, if I listened closely enough, like a voice saying, "Remember, remember, remember." Remember what? I asked myself in the dark hours. Remember your vows? Remember your God? Remember who you are? Or remember who you might have been? I threw myself into work. I repainted the rectory kitchen. I organized a food drive for the Syrian refugee families that had been resettled in the county. I wrote my homilies with an intensity that bordered on desperation, speaking of grace and mercy and the mysterious workings of divine love, all the while knowing that the most powerful love I had ever felt was not divine at all but terribly, humanly specific. Elena, sitting in the fourth pew, her eyes closed during the Eucharistic prayer, her lips moving to words that might have been prayer or might have been something else entirely. Maeve O'Brien noticed, of course. Maeve noticed everything. That Portuguese woman seems very devoted. Father, she said one morning, handing me my stamps with a look that could have cut glass. Very devoted indeed. She's finding her way, I said, as we all are. Said Maeve. And that, contained encyclopedias. It happened in December. The storm. They called it Storm Brid. It came in from the Atlantic like a punishment, stripping tiles from roofs and power from lines. The town went dark at 3 in the afternoon. By 5, the sea was climbing the harbor wall. I was in the church, securing the windows, when the door opened and Elena came in, soaked through, her coat dark with rain, her hair plastered to her face. "The power's out in my cottage," she said. "And the wind. I couldn't stay there alone. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." "Don't apologize," I said. "Come to the rectory. I'll make tea." She sat at my kitchen table. I gave her a towel, a blanket, a cup of tea with sugar. The fire was going. The candles were lit, not for atmosphere, just for light. But candlelight has a way of turning any room into a confession booth, doesn't it? It removes the sharp edges. It makes every face softer, younger, more honest. We talk for hours, not through the confessional screen this time, but face to face, with nothing between us but a pine table and the remains of a meal I had cobbled together from what was in the cupboard: bread, cheese, tinned soup. She told me about the night Maria died, how she had felt the absence. Before the doctor confirmed it, a stillness inside her that was different from sleep, different from peace. How she had held the baby afterward, this perfect, silent creature, and understood for the first time that love and loss were not opposites, but the same thing, viewed from different angles. "Do you ever wonder," she said, and the candlelight caught the wetness on her cheeks, "what it would feel like to hold someone and not have to let go?" The wind screamed outside. The windows rattled in their frames. The whole world sounded like it was trying to get in. "Every day," I said, and then there was silence. Not the silence of the confessional, which is structured and expected. This was the silence of two people who have just said too much and not enough. The silence that sits between a door opening and a foot stepping through. She reached across the table, not to touch my hand, just to move the candle slightly to the left, so the flame wasn't between us anymore. But in that reaching, her sleeve brushed my wrist, and the contact, 2 inches of skin, no more, went through me like a defibrillator. She slept in the spare room that night. I lay in my bed, 8 feet away on the other side of a wall, listening to the storm outside and the storm inside. And I bargained with God the way a drowning man bargains with the sea. "Take this from me," I prayed. "Take this wanting. Take this need. I have given you everything, my youth, my solitude, my body's whole capacity for tenderness. I have poured it all into this collar, this vocation, this beautiful, impossible promise. Don't ask me to carry this too." But God, who is eloquent in all things, was silent. After that night, something shifted between us. Nothing had happened, and everything had. She still came to Daly, Massachusetts. She still sat in the fourth pew. She still came to the confessional on Thursdays. But now there was an electricity in the ordinary, a charge in every glance, every word, every careful avoidance of the things we could not say. I began to take longer walks along the cliff path after evening prayers. The Atlantic in winter is a ruthless therapist. It will not let you lie to yourself. Standing on the edge, with the wind stripping away everything soft, I confronted the truth. I was in love with Elena Carvalho, not in the abstract, not platonically, not in any of the sanitized ways that priests are permitted to love. I loved her, the way men have loved women since the species began, with my body, my mind, and the most frightened parts of my soul. I began losing sleep. I lost weight. Mrs. Gallagher commented on it, pinching my arm after Mass and declaring me thin as a winter heron. I began making mistakes in the liturgy, small ones, an inverted phrase. Here, a missed response there, but they felt enormous, as if the ritual itself was rejecting me. "You seem tired, Father," old Declan Murphy said one afternoon. "The parish can manage if you need a rest." "I'm fine, Declan," I said. The lie came so easily it terrified me. The worst part, the cruelest irony, was that the confessional, which had always been my place of clarity, became the place of my greatest confusion, because Elena kept coming, and what she confessed, week after week, was not sin, but something far more dangerous. "Hope. I feel alive here," she whispered through the screen one Thursday. "For the first time in years, I feel like there might be a reason to stay somewhere." "Is that wrong, Father? To want to stay?" "It's not wrong," I said, and my voice broke on the second word. She paused. "Thomas. Not Father. Thomas." No one had called me Thomas in 15 years. I should have ended it then. I should have recommended she see Father Doyle in the next parish. I should have put the screen between us, the real screen, the invisible one that a priest is meant to maintain between himself and the human wreckage of desire. But I said nothing, and silence, I have learned, is its own kind of confession. It was a Tuesday, November the 14th, 7:43 in the evening. I had stayed late in the church, as I often did now, finding reasons to be there after hours, polishing candlesticks, reorganizing hymnals, doing anything to fill the silence of the rectory with something other than my own thoughts. And then she was there, standing at the altar rail, not praying, just standing. The church was dark except for the sanctuary lamp, that single red flame that burns perpetually, a reminder that God is present. In its light, her face was carved in shadow and fire. "I can't do this anymore," she said. I set down the hymnal I was holding, walked toward her, stopped 3 feet away. The distance felt like miles and like nothing at all. "Do what?" I said, though I knew. Of course I knew. "Pretend," she said. "Pretend that these Thursday confessions are confessions. Pretend that I come to daily Mass for God. Pretend that when I close my eyes during the Eucharistic prayer, I'm praying." "Elena, no. Listen to me. Because I'm going to say this once, and then you're going to have to decide, and whatever you decide, I will accept. But I need to say it. I need to say it in a church, in front of God, because I'm tired of saying it only to myself in the dark." She took a breath. The church was so quiet I could hear the rain on the roof. Each drop a separate percussion, 1,000 tiny witnesses. "I love you, Thomas. Not Father Thomas. Not my priest. You, the man who makes terrible tea and reads Heaney's poetry when he thinks no one is listening. The man who cried when he told me about the boy who died in the fishing accident. The man on the other side of the wall during the storm." She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the rain on her coat, close enough that the space between us was no longer space, but a decision. "I'm not asking you to leave the church," she said. "I'm not asking you to break your vows. I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Just once. Not as a priest. As a man. Do you feel what I feel?" I looked at her, And then I looked at the sanctuary lamp. That small, stubborn flame, the symbol of a presence that had been the organizing principle of my entire adult life. And I felt the cassock on my shoulders. All 3 pounds of it. Every button, every thread, every promise woven into every fiber. Yes, I said. God help me. Yes. She closed her eyes, and something passed across her face that was neither joy nor sorrow, but something older and more complicated, the expression of someone who has been searching for water in the desert and, finding it, realizes that drinking means everything will change. So what do we do? She whispered. And that was the question, wasn't it? The only question, not whether we loved each other. That had been settled long before either of us admitted it. But what we were prepared to do about it. I could have kissed her, standing there, with the sanctuary lamp flickering, and the rain drowning the world outside. I could have closed the distance between us and done what every cell in my body was screaming to do. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down in the front pew, and she sat beside me, and for a long time, we said nothing. Tone, quiet, deliberate. What I said next was perhaps the hardest thing I have ever said. There are 2 lives in front of us. In one, we pretend. We continue as priest and parishioner. You sit in the 4th pew. I say Massachusetts. We speak through the confessional screen, and we live with the ache of what we cannot have. And perhaps in time the ache dulls, or perhaps it doesn't, but we preserve the shape of what we've built, and we ask God to fill the hollow spaces. I paused. And in the other life? She asked. In the other life, I take off this collar. I go to Bishop Moran. I tell him the truth. And then I walk out of this church, and I don't come back. Not as Father Thomas, just as Thomas, a man with no parish, no purpose, no identity except the one I build from scratch. A man who will be talked about in every pub and kitchen in Dunmore for the rest of his life. A man who broke his promise to God. And which man do I get? Elena asked. That's what I'm trying to figure out. She reached over and took my hand. Not impulsively, deliberately, carefully, the way you pick up something fragile and irreplaceable. Her palm was warm against mine. 5 fingers interlaced with 5 fingers. 10 points of contact that felt like an entire theology. I don't want to be the reason you lose yourself, she said. You're not, I said. You're the reason I found myself. That's the problem. We sat there until the candles burned low, until the rain softened to a whisper, until the church, that ancient stone vessel that had held 1,000 years of prayers and secrets, held one more. And then she left, and I knelt in the empty nave and wept, not for what I was losing, but for the terrible beauty of having something worth losing at. Oh, I want to see Bishop Moran the following week. Not to resign, not yet, but to talk, to confess in the oldest and most literal sense to a man who had the authority to hear it. Moran was 72. He had a face like a weather-beaten cliff and eyes that had seen more human frailty than most people could imagine. He listened without interrupting. He didn't flinch. He didn't condemn. When I finished, He sat in silence for a full minute, then said, "Thomas, you're not the first priest to sit in that chair and tell me this. You won't be the last. The question is not whether you're a sinner. We all are. The question is what kind of life you can live honestly." He gave me 3 months of leave, sent me to a retreat center in Glendalough, where the mountains were so silent they felt like the inside of God's ear. I didn't contact Elena during those months. She didn't contact me. I don't know how she knew to wait, but she did. Perhaps that was its own kind of prayer. At the retreat, I did what I had spent my whole life teaching others to do. I sat with the uncertainty. I stopped bargaining. I stopped performing. I let the silence speak. And what the silence said, eventually, was this, that the God I believed in was not a God of cages, but a God of doors. That a vow made in joy and kept in agony serves no one, not God, not the parish, not the man who made it. That there is a difference between sacrifice and self-destruction, and that the cassock, which had once felt like wings, now felt like a shroud. I came back to Dunmore in February. The crocuses were pushing through. The cold ground, small purple flames in the mud. I said Mass one last time. The 7 o'clock. Elena was not there. The fourth pew was empty. Afterward, I stood at the altar and looked out at the faces of the people I had loved for 22 years. Mrs. Gallagher with her bad hip. Declan Murphy with his sorrows. The Brennan sisters, 91 and 89, who shared a single hymnal because one couldn't see and the other couldn't. Hold the book steady. I have something to tell you, I said. And I told them. Not everything. Not Elena's name. But the truth, that I was leaving the active priesthood, that I had served them with love and would carry them in my heart, that I was not losing my faith, but finding a different way to live it. Some cried. Some nodded. Maeve O'Brien pursed her lips in a way that could have meant anything. Old Declan caught me at the door and squeezed my hand with his enormous, weathered grip and said, "Whatever you need, Thomas, you're still one of ours." I barely made it to the sacristy before the tears came. That was 3 years ago. I live in the white cottage on Harbor Street now, the one that used to be Elena's, though we found a slightly larger one together, 2 streets back from the sea, with a garden where I grow tomatoes and she grows herbs that remind her of Lisbon. I teach English literature at the secondary school in town. Yeats mostly. Lot of Heaney. Some Kavanaugh, for the students who need to know that. Holiness can be found in a field as easily as in a cathedral. It turns out that 22 years of preaching is excellent preparation for standing in front of teenagers and trying to make them care about poetry. Elena works at the small gallery on the harbor, watercolors, mostly by local artists who paint the sea in every shade of gray. She has started painting too, tentatively, the way someone starts speaking a language they once knew fluently but forgot. We are not married. We may never be. Not because we don't want to, but because we are both, in our different ways, cautious about promises now. We have learned that the shape of love does not require a ceremony to hold it. I still believe in God. If that surprises you, it shouldn't. Leaving the Priesthood is not leaving God. It is merely leaving one room in a very large house. I pray, though differently. I pray the way the sea prays, by being present, by showing up, by moving and retreating and moving again. Some mornings, I walk past St. Brendan's on my way to school. The new priest, Father Keene, is young and earnest and has a terrible singing voice, which the parish adores. The sanctuary lamp still burns. The stained glass still catches the morning light. The fourth pew is occupied by a woman named Margaret, who has come every day since her husband died. I don't go in, but I don't look away either. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to leave you with something. Not a moral, life resists morals, but a few truths I've learned, for whatever they're worth. First, the weight we carry is not always the weight we were meant to carry. There is a difference between a cross and a cage, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set one down. Second, love is not the enemy of devotion. Love is devotion. It is the most rigorous, demanding, terrifying form of prayer there is. Anyone who tells you that choosing love over duty is the easy path has never done it. Third, the people who matter will not be the ones who judge you. They will be the ones who, like old Declan, squeeze your hand and say, "You're still one of ours." Fourth, it is possible to break a promise and still be a person of integrity, because integrity is not about never changing. It is about changing, honestly. And fifth, the confessional is not a room. It is not a wooden booth with a screen. The confessional is any moment when you stop performing and start telling the truth. It can happen at a kitchen table during a storm. It can happen on a cliff above the Atlantic. It can happen in a church at 7:43 on a Tuesday evening in November when you say yes to the question you have been running from your entire life. It is evening now. The rain has stopped, which in Dunmore is an event worthy of celebration. Elena is in the kitchen. I can hear her singing something in Portuguese, soft and low, a melody that drifts through the house like incense. I am sitting by the window, looking at the sea. It is doing what it always does, arriving, departing, arriving again. Faithful in its own way, consistent in its restlessness. And the wind that has carried every prayer, every confession, every whispered truth from this small town on the edge of the world, the wind is still blowing. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, it sounds less like a lament and more like a hymn.